Sniecinski, and I'm president of E-Rate Advantage, and we are a full-service E-Rate consulting company. I'd like to thank the Florida Charter Institute for inviting us here to speak with all of you today. A special thanks to Celine, Curtis, and the team at Building Hope for arranging all of this, and for you to take the time out of your busy schedules to listen to me. The presentation is going to be an overview of the E-Rate program. If you have any specific questions that I don't get to, or anything specific to your institution and you want to talk about, feel free to raise your hand during the Q&A or contact me offline. Here's a quick summary of what we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about the E-Rate program, updates for 2026, school requirements, the application process, new schools and startup schools, and a little bit about us at E-Rate Advantage. So let's start with a quick overview of the E-Rate program. E-Rate is a federal program. It's sponsored by the FCC. It's managed by the Universal Service Administrative Company, or USAC, and all applications are reviewed and approved by a company called Ernst & Young. E-Rate provides schools and libraries discounts on internet access services, Wi-Fi equipment, basic maintenance of that equipment, and managed internal broadband services. The first year E-Rate distributed funds was 1998 with $2.25 billion. It's been around for over 20 years and is widely considered one of the best government education programs of all time. But as I stated, E-Rate's a federal program, and because it's a federal program, it can change from year over year. So the program we're going to talk about today is the E-Rate program as it stands right now. Who's eligible? In general terms, any school that is not for profit, has an endowment less than $50 million, and meets the statutory definition of elementary and secondary school found in the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001 is eligible for E-Rate support. In certain states, Head Starts are also eligible. Florida is one of those states. The only caveats are that all children must be 3 years old and older, and no home-based locations are eligible. The entire E-Rate program is predicated on how many students you have and how many of those students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. The more students you have eligible for free and reduced lunch, the higher your E-Rate discounts become. The easiest way to determine this is to participate in the National School Lunch Program. However, it's not mandatory. If you don't participate in the National School Lunch Program, you can use a family income survey, and in some instances, financial aid documents. For Category 1, which is Internet Access and WAN services, E-Rate discounts range from 20% for schools who have less than 1% of their population eligible for free and reduced lunch, all the way up to 90% for schools who having 75% or more of their students eligible for free and reduced lunch. For Category 2, which is network equipment, maintenance of network equipment, and managed internal broadband services, E-Rate discounts range from 20% all the way up to 85%, along with all other discount ranges in between. Let's dive into what Category 1 and Category 2 are. E-Rate is broken down into two different categories of service. Category 1, which is Internet Access and WANs, and Category 2, which is network equipment, basic maintenance of network equipment, and managed internal broadband services, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. For Category 1, we're talking about the Internet Access services that you have or want. This can include any type of service or speed that you need. With Category 1, there's no budget, so as long as you can justify the need for the internet bandwidth and you follow all the E-Rate rules, E-Rate will approve your application for internet access. Let me give you an example. If you have an internet bill of $1,000 a month or $12,000 a year, and you qualify for a 90% E-Rate discount, the E-Rate program will cover $10,800, which is your discounted share, meaning the E-Rate program pays this amount. And you'd be responsible for $1,200. This is your undiscounted share, meaning that you only pay $1,200 a year for internet access. The easiest way to think about Category 1 is it brings internet access to your school's front door, while Category 2 takes the internet from your front door and distributes it around the school to the classroom and students. Let's dive into what Category 2 is. Category 2 is made up of network equipment, basic maintenance of network equipment, and managed internal broadband services. Some of the network equipment that's covered by E-Rate are as follows: routers, switches, wireless access points, cabling, racks for eligible equipment, controllers, basic firewalls and firewall services, UPSs for eligible equipment, software for eligible equipment, and caching servers and services. For basic maintenance of network equipment, the above mentioned equipment is eligible and includes break fix, software updates, and patches, just to name a few things. While network equipment and basic maintenance of network equipment are pretty self-explanatory, managed internal broadband services, more commonly known as MIBs, is a bit more difficult to explain. Let me try to explain MIBs. MIBs is a kind of combination of network equipment and basic maintenance. The most common form of MIBs is for a school to enter into a lease agreement with a provider and for that provider to provide the school both network equipment and 24/7 management and maintenance. This agreement is typically a multi-year agreement at a fixed monthly cost where the ownership, management, and responsibility of the network equipment lies with the provider. However, there's a few different types of MIBs agreements. One, the school needs new equipment and management. Two, the school has an existing equipment and they want someone to manage that existing equipment. Or three, the school has need for new equipment, has some existing equipment, and they want someone to manage both the new and old. The main component of MIBs is 24/7 management and maintenance. With MIBs, it's always a fixed monthly cost for a set period of time, and that's usually multiple years. Unlike Category 1, Category 2 has a budget. Let's discuss the budget in the next slide. The biggest difference between Category 1 and Category 2 is Category 2 has a budget while Category 1 does not. For Category 1, you can apply with a blank check method. You put your application out to bid, select your vendor, and as long as you follow the rules and can justify the price, you'd get funded. This is not the case for Category 2. For Category 2, you have a 5-year budget. The current budget cycle starts for the 2026 E-rate year. That's July 1st, 2026 to June 30th, 2031. Therefore, for the 2026 E-rate year, everyone has a full budget. Schools' budgets are $201.57 per student. This is $201.57 per student will only be increased for inflation beginning in 2031. This $201.57 is your budget for the next 5 years. Therefore, you have 5 years starting in 2026 to spend your Category 2 budget. And let me explain using an example. If you're a school with 1,000 students, you'd have $201,570 in your Category 2 budget. This $201,570 is your budget for the next 5 years. You can spend this in any fashion that you see fit. You can spend it all in 1 year, evenly over the 5 years, or any fashion that you guys want. However, this is the only money you're going to get for Category 2 equipment and maintenance for the next 5 years. Let's use an example where you get an 80% E-rate discount. If you spend all $201,570, you'd get back 80% from the E-rate program, and you'd be responsible for 20%. Therefore, you'd get back $161,256, and you'd be responsible for $40,314. The easiest way to think about your budget is the max amount of money you can spend and still receive a discount. Meaning if you spend less than $201,570, you'd get back 80% of that amount. However, if you spend more than $201,570, you'd get back $161,256, and you'd be responsible for 100% of any overage. However, if your school population grows, your Category 2 budget grows with it. Every student you add adds $201.57 to your Category 2 budget over the 5-year period. With this said, in past years, this was automatic, but going forward, we have to petition the Use Act to increase these budgets. These budgets are only for Category 2 equipment, basic maintenance of network equipment, and MIBs. Now that you have an understanding of what Category 1 and Category 2 are, let's dive into bus Wi-Fi and mobile hotspots. For 2026, on September 30th of 2025, the FCC announced a vote to eliminate bus Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi lending, stating that both of these services are outside the FCC's authority. Therefore, neither of these services are eligible for 2026 or 2027 E-rate funding. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to me directly offline and we can talk about it in more detail. Now that you know the basics of who's eligible and what you're eligible for, let's discuss school requirements. Every school must be SIPA compliant, must be able to validate their discount percentage, and must abide by the document retention policy. What is SIPA? SIPA is the Children's Internet Protection Act. In order to be SIPA compliant, you have to have 3 things. 1, an internet safety policy. 2, a technology protection measure or filter that blocks inappropriate content. And 3, a public board meeting about your policy and filter. For the board meeting, you're going to advertise for it. And then at the meeting, you're going to read your policy into the minutes and discuss your filter. You must keep a record of the advertisement and the board minutes. If you do this, you're SIPA compliant. Discount validation. Every school must be able to determine who qualifies for free and reduced lunch. I imagine the vast majority of you plan or do participate in the National School Lunch Program or CEP. Both of these are great ways to validate your discounts, but don't worry if you don't participate in one of these programs. You can also choose to send out a family income survey or use financial aid documents to validate your school's discount. For more information on family income surveys, please feel free to reach out to me offline and I can provide you a sample survey. Lastly, the document retention policy for E-rate is 10 years from the last date to receive service. The following is an example of things you may want to keep: all FCC forms and related documents, communications with potential vendors, copies of winning and losing bids, the final bid evaluation and supporting documentation, and contracts and invoices. This is not an exhaustive list, but a place to get started. Now that you know who's eligible, what you're eligible for, and your requirements, let's talk about the actual process. Now that we're going to discuss the application process, the first place to start is EPC or EPIC. I first have to admit the next couple slides really get into the weeds, so if I lose you anywhere, or if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them during the Q&A or email me offline. The E-rate Productivity Center, or EPIC, is the main portal where all E-rate forms and applications are filed. Before you can even begin to file for E-rate, you must register your school in the EPC system, and you must designate a person at your school to be the account administrator. This person will be your E-rate point person for your school. You can have multiple EPC users, but one person has to be the account administrator. Once you get set up in EPIC, you're ready to get started. Once you get set up in EPIC, the next thing you want to do is determine what services you want or need to apply for. Remember, you have two different categories of service. You've got category 1, which is your internet access and WANs, and you've got category 2, which is your network equipment, basic maintenance of network equipment, and managed internal broadband services. Some years you may want to apply for all services, while others you may only want to apply for certain services, but this is the spot in the process for you to determine that. You are applying in the fall or winter prior to the next E-rate year. E-rate runs from July 1st till June 30th. So you're applying now for July 1st of 2026 to June 30th, 2027. Once you determine the services that you want to apply for, now you've got to establish your vendor selection criteria. Before you can file for E-rate, you have to establish vendor selection criteria, and this is the criteria that you're going to use to evaluate all of your bids that you receive. E-rate is the closest thing to free money, and because the government's going to give you free money, they tell you you have to do two things. First, you have to run an open and fair competitive bidding process where everyone has access to the same information. And two, you've got to weigh all bids against the same vendor selection criteria and select the most cost-effective vendor for you. E-rate says you can use whatever criteria you want, but one of the criteria must be price of eligible goods and services, and it must be the single most heavily weighed criteria. So here's a quick example of vendor selection criteria: price at 40%, experience with the school at 20%, experience with E-rate at 20%, and references at 20%. Once you determine your services and establish your vendor selection criteria, you're now ready to start the application process. The next step is to file the FCC Form 470. The 470 application is the first application in the process and is the description of services requested and certification form. The 470 is the application that you file to let potential vendors know what services you're looking for. The easiest way to think about your 470 is as your bidding document. You may post something like, we're looking for internet access of 100 megabytes to 500 megabytes, and we're looking for 5 new wireless access points. This application goes out into the USAC website for a minimum of 28 days. This is the mandatory waiting period before you can select any vendors or sign any contracts. During the 28-day waiting period, vendors will reach out, ask questions, and provide bids. Please remember, if you want to file a 471 for a service, it first must have to be bid out on a 470. This 470 must go out into the E-rate website for a minimum of 28 days. You can wait longer than 28 days, but you cannot wait less than 28 days. After the 20 days is over, you're free to evaluate your bids and select your providers. This is the spot in the process where your vendor selection criteria comes back into play. Once you file your 470, wait your 28 days, you're now free to select your vendor and sign your contracts. However, you first have to take all bids and weigh them against the same vendor selection criteria and must select the most cost-effective vendor for you. Remember, you don't need to pick the cheapest vendor, but the most cost-effective based on the vendor selection criteria that you established. After you select your vendors, you're free to file your 471 application. The 471 application is the description of services ordered and certification form. I call it the meat and potatoes application. It's the application that lets USAC know who you selected, what services, how much they're going to cost, and what time period they're going to cover. Remember, these services would have first have to be bid out on a 470 before they can be included on a 471. The 471 application is the application that goes into the USAC system and gets reviewed and hopefully approved. Let's discuss the review process. The USAC review process starts as soon as you file a 471. While USAC gets upwards of 40,000 applications every year, they only have about 300 to 400 reviewers. So you have no real insight into when your application gets picked for a review. But once it does, some of the typical questions you might get are: prove you're actually a school, validate your total enrollment and free and reduced lunch count, and send us copies of your internet contracts or copies of your internet bills. These are examples of typical questions that you can expect to receive. Your application may also get pulled for a special compliance review, cost-effective review, or other type of audit. During these reviews, they typically focus on a specific aspect of the process, such as your vendor selection process or your cost effectiveness of your vendors. USAC also reserves the right to audit your applications for up to 10 years from the last date to receive services. This is why your document retention policy and procedures are so important. E-rate will force you to return money if these processes and procedures are not properly followed. After the review process, hopefully your application gets approved. If it gets approved before the start of the funding year, so before July 1st, that's great. However, if it gets approved after the start of the funding year, your discounts and reimbursements are all retroactive back to the they're all retroactive back to the start of the funding year. Therefore, no matter when you get approved, you're still covered for the entire funding year. After your application is approved, you get a Funding Commitment Decision Letter, or FCDL. This is the official approval letter from USAC. It tells you what was approved, the services, the service providers, the dollar amounts, and the time frame. If anything was denied, it tells you what was denied and what. Once you get your FCDL, you have to file what's called the FCC Form 486. This form lets USAC know what services have started and that your school is HIPAA compliant. This way, if USAC gets invoiced, they know they can pay the invoice. You should not file the FCC Form 486 until you can make all certifications on the form. Now that you've been approved, you've filed your 486, it's now time to decide how you want to get your money back. You have two different options, Bear or SPY. With Bear, you pay your bill in full as if E-rate never existed, and then you file for reimbursement or Bear forms at the end of the year. Typically, if you select Bear, you file your Bear form once every 6 months or once a year. At that time, you file online and get an electronic funds transfer into your bank account for your discounted portion of your services. With SPY, you work with your provider to set up your account to receive direct discounts on your bills if the provider offers that option. The way this works is instead of your provider billing you 100%, they'd invoice you. They will bill you for your undiscounted portion, and then they go back to the government and get their discounted portion directly from them. If you're a new school or a startup school, if you're a new school or school that has not opened, you still follow basically the same processes and procedures. You get set up in Epic, you determine what services you need, you establish your vendor selection criteria, you file your 470, review your bids, select your vendors, and file your 471. Now, this is where the process might change slightly. If your school has yet to open and USAC pulls your application for a review, you probably won't be able to answer all their questions, but you're going to answer all the questions that you can with the estimates that you use to file your application, or you're going to ask the reviewer to put your application on hold. This is completely up to the reviewer. They'll either review your application with estimates, and then you'll be able to document those estimates at a later date, or they'll put your application on hold until you have answers to their questions, such as student counts, etc. Don't let anyone tell you you can't apply for E-rate until you actually have students. This is not accurate. You can apply now with estimates, and you should apply now. If I lost anyone in the weeds, here's what E-rate boils down to. Imagine you're opening a charter school and you're going to spend $20,000 on network equipment. E-rate can cover up to 85% of that amount, so don't lose this opportunity. Whether you apply on your own or use a company like ours, we just want to make sure you're applying. E-rate's the closest thing to free money, and every school should be taking advantage of the program. Now, with all that said, E-rate's a program that you can apply for on your own, and if you have been, please continue to do so. But if you find the process too complicated, too time-consuming, or too confusing, that's where E-rate Advantage can help. We've been around since 2005. We have over 500 clients throughout the country and are members of the Florida Consortium of Public Charter Schools, and just recently received a Charter School Champion Award for the services we provide to the Florida Consortium of Public Charter Schools members. We like to say we take 85 to 90% of the E-rate burden off of your desk and onto ours. We are a full-service E-rate consulting company. We file all applications. We act as a single point of contact with the government during the review so that you don't have to. We file all post-commitment paperwork, and we file for reimbursement or set up your account for direct discount, whatever you prefer. We do all this while charging you nothing up front and only charging you if you get approved. If you don't get approved, you don't pay us a dime. This is how we guarantee our services. If you'd like more information, please feel free to reach out to me directly. We have listed a few E-rate resources for further information and guidance. Our website, the USAC site, a link to the eligible services list so you can see what products and services are actually eligible, and the phone number for USAC customer service, just in case you get lost along the way. I hope you found this presentation helpful. I know E-rate can be complicated and convoluted, so right now I'm going to open it up to questions. If I don't get to your question or you have more specific questions that are more in-depth, please feel free to reach out to me offline.
All right, Ben, thank you so much. That was such great information. And I'm going to post this online for everyone to have just in case that this was a lot because you really dissected everything here. So quick question, Ben, if you can help me. For those folks who are opening new schools or maybe they just don't know, who in the school goes through this process, right? Like, is it the principal? Is it an administrator? And typically in your client base, who do you have a connection with and provide services with? Who is responsible?
So typically on a new school, it's the principal or executive director who's opening the school, who's intimate involvement with the charter and everything else, because they're going to be the ones that have all that information. And also we're applying almost 6 months in advance. So a lot of times all these support personnel have not been hired yet. In our client base, it's usually dependent. Some schools, it's a technology director. Some schools, it's an executive director. And then some schools, it's someone in finance. Some of the larger organizations, it's a group of people. So it might be a subset of those people or a team that helps manage it as well.